Dear friends, welcome as we mourn the death and celebrate the life of Stuart Saunders. Welcome particularly to John and Jane, his children, and his 5 grandchildren, Emma and Ryan, Gemma, Ben and Liam, and to Elizabeth, John's partner. To the members of the university as well, including the Chancellor, Dr. Maloya Motsepe, to the Vice-Chancellor, and to her 3 predecessors, Njabulo Ndebele, Mampila Rampela, and Max Price, and to the Chair of Council, and to all Stuart's friends, who are legion. It is my privilege to invite the Vice-Chancellor to speak.
Thank you, Hugh. Since Dr. Saunders' passing, we've had so many fond remembrances. We heard how Dr. Stuart Saunders demonstrated his patriotism by defying South African law. He defied the Group Areas Act to open UCT's residences to all South Africans in 1981. He opposed the amendment to the Extension of University Education Act, known as the Quota Bill, in 1983. And he opposed the proposal in 1987 to amend legislation that would force universities to prevent political protest. Dr. Saunders stood on many front lines, including the front line of academic and institutional transformation. Long before our democracy, he saw the future of a non-racial South Africa. He knew that when democracy finally arrived, UCT would be pivotal in preparing leaders who would heal and transform our nation. In the midst of an unequal society, he was a champion of equality. In the midst of turmoil, he was a nation builder. Under his leadership, UCT put in new policies on admissions and readmissions, academic development, financial aid, student housing, employment equity, and affirmative action, putting our campus community on the road to transformation. In 1994, he encouraged representatives from all stakeholder groups to meet, to plan and manage the consultation process that led to the formation of the University Transformation Forum, which was instrumental in revising UCT's mission statement, which guided the institution for many years after it was adopted in 1996. When Dr. Stuart Saunders became Vice-Chancellor, UCT had a total enrollment of just over 11,000 students, of whom 12% were Black. On his retirement in 1996, the student body had grown to almost 41%, to 15,500, of whom just under half were Black. The ratio of postgraduate student numbers also grew significantly, from just over 10% to almost 30%, an important step forward towards building capacity in South Africa to respond not only to our own problems, but to the problems faced by the world. After his term as Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Stuart Saunders continued to serve UCT and the nation. He helped put in place the policies and systems to preserve and nurture all tertiary institutions in South Africa by serving on the Minister of Education's National Working Group in 2001 to restructure higher education, and from 2002 to 2010 on the board of the Council on Higher Education. He conducted studies in higher education policy and founded the Tertiary Education Network, or TENET, the non-profit company which pioneered higher education digital connectivity. He was TENET's first chair from 2000 until 2007. He also continued to serve UCT, working mostly behind the scenes, where he built and strengthened the relationship that have helped UCT to grow over years since his leadership. In this way, Dr. Saunders demonstrated his true heart as a servant leader. He recognized the strong role philanthropy played in supporting non-racial education, independent research, and academic freedom in South Africa. So he was instrumental in setting up the UCT fund in the USA, and in the early 1980s, followed in the early 1990s by the UCT Trust in the UK, where he served on the board for 2 decades. He was a trustee of organizations like the Claude Lyon Foundation, the Fox Foundation, the Web Trust, and he served as the Andrew Mellon Foundation's senior advisor for grant making in South Africa. He assisted other South African universities, in particular UWC and WITS. In 2002, he received a national honor, the Order of Baobab Silver, for his medical research and his outstanding contribution to university education. In recognition of his lifetime of service, he received no fewer than 7 honorary degrees. Like a true servant leader, Dr. Saunders assumed full responsibility when anything went wrong, but he gave generous credit to all those who helped him to realize his vision for higher education: his family, colleagues, students, alumni, and donors. In that spirit, I extend thanks to each of you who stood by him in his work. He would be the first to say he could not have done it without you, just as we know we could not have done it without him. May his soul rest in peace.
Thank you, Getty. The Department of Medicine was Stuart Saunders' professional home for much of his life, as undergraduate, as postgraduate student, as researcher, and as professor of medicine in succession to Jack Brock from 1971 to 1980, and in retirement. It was here that he taught, researched, and was a dedicated clinician, and where he established with John Blanche the Liver Centre. It is my privilege to invite Ntobeko Ntusi, Professor and Head of the Department of Medicine, to pay tribute to Dr. Saunders.
Thanks, Hugh, and thank you, Getty, for that tribute. Friends and colleagues, John and Jane, I'm deeply honored to be able to say a few words about Stuart as a teacher committed to his art, as an astute clinician deeply rooted in bedside medicine and with extraordinary talent, as a courageous and moral leader, as a most generous and gentle mentor, and as a dear friend who remained loyal to his last day. So, what of Stuart the teacher? He saw medicine as an apprenticeship. He was adored by his students to whom he taught principles and approaches. Stories of him as head of medicine arriving unannounced in the old D1 ward between 8 and 9 p.m. in the evening, often in his yellow shirt that Jane so despised, and demanding that final year medical students, interns and registrars present difficult clinical cases to him for the most recent admission, and would insist on confirming the history and physical science himself before a masterly tutorial, and thereby contributing to the appropriate management of thousands of medical patients in his department. And what of Stuart the clinician? Trained in Cape Town, at the Hammersmith in London, and at Harvard, he is regarded by many as one of the finest physicians of his generation and a giant in the field of hepatology, though he often would confide in me that Frank Foreman was by far the best clinician he had known. His knowledge of medicine was encyclopedic. He was less interested in fancy tests and investigations. He rather focused on what the patient and her body was telling you. As vice-chancellor, when in meeting many counterparts from all over the world, he was often called upon to confirm or refute diagnosis. One of his students, Jacob Valley, wrote a poem in tribute titled A Clinician's Eulogy, and I'm gratefully permitted me to read it here, and it goes: a fond farewell to a keen clinician, his secret, examine with precision, very rarely for a diagnosis stamped. He then, not to a conclusion jumped, rather to read this an opportunity and to re-examine with accuracy. Errors, he taught, were oft due to omission, only rarely due to that of commission. His knowledge, vast and encyclopedic, as a teacher, verily fantastic. Many benefited from his wise pearls. To match, we'd have to travel to a few worlds. Wish him well on his heavenly sojourn. Our love and respect he did earn. And what about Stuart as a leader? He viciously opposed racially segregated universities. He opened UCT's residences to students of all races and put an end to racially segregated training of medical registrars at Groote. During a stormy and dark period in the history of this country, he led the department in distinction and university with grace and distinction. Finally, what can I tell you about Stuart as a mentor? As a young and foolish man, I'd always believed the dictum attributed to Oscar Wilde, which goes, "There are few things more dangerous than unsolicited advice." My regular lunches with Stuart were peppered with fantastic stories told in immaculate detail and great humor, all of which had ample wisdom and multiple lessons for me as a young leader. And now, thanks to Stuart, there are few things that I value more than unsolicited advice. Stuart was generous to a fault. Many of our meetings started like this, with him asking, "Do you know so-and-so?" which he knew I did not, and I would answer in the negative. A crumpled piece of paper with a name, phone number, and an email would be thrust in front of me in Stuart's unmistakable handwriting. With a suggestion, I gave the person a call. And by the time I did, they had been briefed by Stuart and were ready to offer as much support to me and the department as needed. In closing, I wish to salute Stuart for his singular and dominant intellect, his courageous leadership, his kindness and generosity as a teacher and clinician. John and Jane and your families and all who knew him, you have much to be proud of in what he achieved and what he stood for. And while I miss him as a mentor and a friend, I'm comforted by the knowledge that his accomplishments will continue to exemplify the very best in our university and in our society. Lala ngokolo. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntobeka. The first of two tribute videos will follow. The focus of this is on Stuart as a family man, and on the family, and on him as an academic. Stuart's time as Vice-Chancellor saw decisive changes in enrolment, in the curriculum, and in the role of students in university governance. It is my privilege and pleasure to invite Hermione Cronje and Tulani Konyili to speak. They were SRC presidents in his time.
Thank you very much, Hugh, and thank you very much, everybody in attendance today. Hermione and I, who were in student structures at the turn of the 90s, are honored and privileged to represent the activists and student leaders of the 1980s and 1990s. And that was a time, as we will recall, of escalating and sustained resistance to apartheid. His tenure occurred against the national backdrop of renewed and sustained opposition to apartheid, as led by the mass democratic movement within the country and a global opposition to and isolation of the pariah that was the apartheid state. During this time, we witnessed students and staff of UCT participating in national campaigns against apartheid, including the famous Purple Rain March of 1989, I think some will remember. Dr. Saunders' term of office commenced at a time when Black students were still required to procure permits to study at UCT and to live in townships due to the Pernicious Group Areas Act. A number of past students, including Phumlani Muhodi, have paid fulsome tributes to Dr. Saunders on various occasions and platforms. The 80s and 90s were a time that witnessed higher enrollments of Black students at UCT, and this coincided with an increased militancy within student structures that fought and campaigned vigorously for a more demographically representative student and staff complement at UCT, and the racial integration of university residencies, sports, cultural, and political structures, as well as that which Hugh has alluded to, which is greater representation of students in university governance.
So 1991, for me, was a defining moment, both in my life, but in my personal relationship with Dr. Saunders. The 1991 workers' strike, which brought with it heightened tensions and differences between students, workers, and what we like to call university management. So workers downed tools and Black students almost uniformly supported the workers, connecting very strongly with their plight. For me, the strike laid bare the deep divisions that lie beneath the surface of what was commonly referred to as the Rainbow Nation in those days, before it became something no one really felt comfortable to associate with. But what the strike did, it brought in sharp relief the differences and the divisions of apartheid South Africa. The strike itself resulted in pickets, burning barricades, disruption of classes, and even the picture of the burning professor that got spread around newspapers across the world even. The strike ultimately resulted in a suspension of the academic program for some days. I know this is something that is fairly commonplace these days, but it was a huge deal back then. The defining incident for me involved a fire extinguisher. I was with a res mate of mine who, during a disruption of one of the lectures, came upon some white students who were very angered by the fact that there was an attempt to disrupt their lecture. And he, otherwise a normally quiet and calm and very reserved student, grabbed the fire extinguisher and let loose with this fire extinguisher. And the transformation in the individual that I witnessed in that moment really left quite a mark with me. And I remember walking into Stuart Saunders' office months later, where we were going to discuss the consequences of this conduct for these students. And I remember sitting across from Dr. Saunders, who to me, epitomized the establishment with a capital E. He was this forbidding figure, and he felt extremely passionately that there was a line, and conduct during the strike crossed that line, and for that there had to be consequences. And I told him that I felt fairly conflicted about some of the damage and destruction that I saw, but I also couldn't get the image of the student, my friend actually, out of my mind, and the rage and anger that swelled up in him that led him to grab that fire extinguisher. And I remember at the end of our conversation, not one to just flip, I could see a genuine acknowledgement that it is a complicated story and it is a complex situation. And that pretty much characterized my tenure as SRC president, but also in the subsequent years working with Dr. Stuart Saunders on the Transformation Committee. So for me, Stuart Saunders represented a time and place in UCT's history that I'm proud to be associated with. It was indeed a time of transition, and he indeed was a bridge builder from the dark days of apartheid to what followed.
In closing, thank you, Hemel. When we reflect on the leadership and persona of Dr. Stuart Saunders from our experience, together with a number of other peers and student activists of the time, we had the opportunity to work closely with him as well as his leadership core, including Professors John Reed, Mampila Rampele, Wieland Gevers, Martin West, and Mr. Hugh A. Moore. And we participated in the University Council. In all our dealings with him, we found him, regardless of the issues at hand and our many political differences, unfailingly courteous, engaging, and reflective. He embodied civility, and he consulted deeply with his leadership team in his quest to understand and give space for transformation to occur. And this, of course, he sought to balance with the need to, in his own words, I quote, maintain UCT's place as an institution of the first rank internationally. So his day is done. Our hope and prayer is that current leaders of UCT, students and staff may learn from the consequential example of Dr. Saunders and his team, to listen deeply to one another and to other key stakeholders in the university and the country in order to renew and take the university to new heights and embed further UCT amongst all our people. May it play a pioneering role in the quest to find solutions to our most fundamental challenges as a continent, humanity, and the natural environment. In closing, our hope is that God's countenance may shine upon Dr. Saunders and his late wife, Mrs. Anita Saunders. Thank you.
Thank you, Tilani. Thank you, Hermione. Archbishop Tabo's connections with the Saunders family date from the time that he and Jane were students together in the ASF. Your Grace.
Thank you so much, Hugh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. To Jane and John and your families, our heartfelt condolences on my own and my family's behalf, on behalf of the Anglican Church and also of the Western Cape Religious Leaders Forum. On a personal note, I served with your father on the Bishop Webb Trust, and this past Friday, it was strange and painful not to have him with us and hear him motivating for financial support for postgraduate students in resource-poor universities. And sorry, Jane, I hope I won't embarrass you if I share how every time we met, we used to talk about you, about how when you and I served on the Anglican Student Federation Executive, you would pick up your guitar and sing from the depths of your soul that song against forced removals. We won't go, I see ye ekhaya litsha. But Jane, I'm here, and John, as a representative also of the Cape Town faith community. And in that capacity, it is a great privilege to be here to pay tribute to one of the outstanding figures of our academic community in recent times. Our two communities, and I speak particularly about the apartheid era and since, have enjoyed a respectful, mostly warm collaboration, which we in the faith have valued. It is with pride that I note you conferred an honorary degree on Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu and Archbishop Emeritus Njongonkulu Ndungane, whose studies here were interrupted when he was sent against his will to Robben Island and served as chair of your council. And I too am proud to have been awarded my doctorate by UCT. It is said that being a vice-chancellor in South Africa today is one of the toughest jobs you can imagine. I'm sure that is so. But if we think back to the 1980s, the same can be said. We may not have recognized it at the time because the whole society was in turmoil. But just thinking back to my own university experiences of the 1980s, it's hard to think of institutions battered and buffeted by the struggle as much as universities. Of all institutions one can think of in society, was there any in a more precarious position than a university such as UCT, built to serve the society as it was then structured, but more aware that most institutions of the need to transform to meet new demands, while at the same time coming under sustained, passionate pressure from the most talented members of an emerging generation. Archbishop Tutu, speaking from wide experience around Africa and elsewhere, used to say, if you lose the students in a society, you will ultimately fail. Stuart Saunders led through turbulent times. He led with aplomb. I'm sure he had his critics, but in the end, he never lost students. Others had spoken with more knowledge, than I of the details of his achievement here, but as someone who needed to get a ministerial exemption to get into a new university which aspired to non-racialism, I cannot but mention the enormous importance of his efforts to enroll more students like myself. Dear friends, I just want to say, well done, good and faithful servant. Thank you, God, for Stuart Saunders. May he rest in peace and rise in glory. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Grace. Mary Burton first knew the Saunders family when both families' children were school contemporaries. Later, she would see Stuart as Vice-Chancellor at close quarters as a member and later as the Deputy Chair of the Council. I have the privilege, Mary, of inviting you to pay tribute to Stuart.
Thank you, Hugh. Stuart Saunders has left an imprint on UCT which will endure. A legacy of ethics, vision, academic excellence, and courage. When he took on the challenge of leading this complex institution, he could depend on valued support structures. Of the personal ones, foremost would be his family. On hot, windy afternoons in the 70s, Noreen Saunders and I would be watching our young sons play cricket. Stuart was already fully involved as Professor of Medicine, and Noreen would have carried much of the day-to-day responsibility for the family. He was justifiably proud of his daughter and son, and I add my condolences to them. After Noreen's death, Stuart's marriage to Anita was a strong partnership, enhancing many aspects of his life. As Vice-Chancellor, he found support from the team around him. The complex web of departments and committees of Council and Senate would have been hard to unravel without that backing. He was able to retain their loyalty. He could rely on the experienced registrar and on a diverse and skilled cohort of Deputy Vice-Chancellors, as well as all the people in the Bremner building and other administrative offices. The nationwide drive towards dramatic political change brought urgent challenges to all institutions, especially universities. Stuart strode with courage and determination onto the path of change. He probably faced many more battles than we will ever know about, and many of them were very public and came from all sides. This was a time to draw on all his diplomatic skills, but also a time to confront the critics boldly. In the decision-making structures of the university, the debates could turn lengthy and fractious. In encounters with students and workers, they could be loud and angry. I remember one particularly heated meeting with students on the stage making loud and strong demands for radical change and directing accusations against the university administration, while Stuart sat in the audience, with DVCs, Martin West and Willem Geerwes on either side of him. I was sure they were physically restraining him from leaping up to respond in fury. Throughout it all, the objective of the VC and his team was to maintain the safety, integrity, and sustainability of the university, to protect the campus and its people from the actions of the police, and to control and manage the internal conflicts. UCT's wider community and its international audience had to be borne in mind. Stuart was a successful advocate, establishing and maintaining relationships with individuals and foundations who have contributed generously to UCT, as our Vice-Chancellor has already detailed. One example is the David and Elaine Potter Foundation. Just 2 months ago, he was participating in the selection of this year's Potter Fellows. Elaine and David Potter have sent this tribute to him. I quote from it. Stuart Saunders was a man of the Enlightenment, a polymath, student, doctor, scientist, intellectual, administrator, leader, civic activist, and companion. As professor of medicine, he headed a great department renowned across the world. As VC, he steered the university through the threats of a rampant and threatening government with passive resistance and a vision of a free and enlightened South Africa. He was a great companion and supporter. His wisdom provided our keel for 20 years in establishing the Potter Scholarship Program. We miss him. I echo their words. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Solly Bennett's association with Stuart dates from 1966, when he joined the Brock firm as an intern in which Stuart was a consultant, and from the time as assistant warden to Stuart at Kapana, then Driekoppen residence, in 1970. He was later to succeed Stuart in the chair of medicine, which he held from 1981 to 2007. Solly Bennett.
Thank you, Hugh, and greetings, family and friends. Stuart was a man of few words, but a man of great action. He saw through superficiality and valued sincerity. He started life humbly and rose to great prominence in his chosen field of medical research and practice, as well as within university circles. The solid values imparted to him by his parents assured that despite his rise to the top echelons of medicine and academia, he maintained the common touch and could relate to all people, no matter their status or affiliation. He had a highly respected public image, while maintaining the privacy of his life and that of his family. In brief, he was a remarkable, unforgettable character. It was a privilege and honour to have had him as an enduring friend and colleague for 55 years, and to pay tribute to him today. I first met Stuart when I was an intern in his ward D1 at Grootegeluk Hospital, where I learned much from his example as an excellent clinician. When I became the assistant warden at Driekoppen Men's Residence, he was the warden who, together with his wife Noreen, managed the students' pranks with good humour. They navigated with wisdom and sensitivity the emergencies and occasional tragedies that occurred during his tenure. Both Stuart and Noreen were keen gardeners, growing roses and cultivating orchids. John and Jane enjoyed a loving home, nurtured by both parents, despite the demands of Stuart's responsibilities at the hospital and within the residence. Stuart loved dogs, and there was always a best friend in their home. His early medical activities extended to the College of Medicine, a national body concerned with setting standards and controlling postgraduate examinations in all medical and surgical specialities. He cut his administrative teeth as the college's honorary registrar. While a staunch supporter of the medical profession, he was also critical of its shortcomings. For example, although it was painful for him to do so, he resigned from the South African Medical Association over his dissatisfaction with the handling of the Steve Biko affair. In my interactions with him over many decades, Stuart's clinical skills, his dependability, wise advice, loyalty, integrity, dedication to excellence, and his courageous intolerance of stupidity and dishonesty set high standards that influenced me and many others. I learned much from him through observing his care for patients, his mentoring of clinicians and researchers, his unflappable personality, and his critical thinking. He took great interest in the advancement of students and junior colleagues. He was able to spot and encourage those with talent and ambition, shape the development of many practitioners who remember him with appreciation. He established an international reputation for expanding the department he inherited from Professor Jack Brock, and for the innovative productivity of his liver research group, to which he continued to contribute well past his retirement. His abhorrence of racial discrimination and his pursuit of fairness and excellence in an explicitly discriminatory society resulted in his resisting injustices throughout his career, while maintaining his composure in whatever situation he found himself. When Stuart became Vice-Chancellor, he ensured that the process of my taking over the headship of the Department of Medicine was seamless and transparent. Although assuring me that as Vice-Chancellor he would not get in my hair, I knew he would always be available for advice if needed. After settling comfortably into his smooth-running university administration, he realized that medical practice was an essential aspect of his life, and he requested returning as a part-time physician to the Department of Medicine. We welcomed him back and appreciated his assistance and inspiration in one of the medical firms. As promised, he never interfered with my running of the department. Our relationship was optimally collegial and characterized by mutual respect and relaxed teasing of each other with affection and humor. His sense of propriety was such that while I visited him in his Bremen office on university-related business, he insisted on coming to see me in my medical school office about issues related to his part-time work at the medical school and hospital. Stuart was a strong man, physically, emotionally, and intellectually, and his stoical nature enabled him to bear suffering with dignity and resilience. Noreen's death was a tragedy borne by him and his children in privacy and with strong mutual support. Anita entered Stuart's life at a crucial time and played a vital role in his life and work. Together, they provided loving care for his mother in her old age. Anita expanded his interest and knowledge in the worlds of art and music and offered gracious hospitality both at Denara and in their Cape Town home until her untimely death. Stuart's children and grandchildren were a great source of pride and joy to him. John was a friend and soulmate, and Stuart enjoyed John's visits to South Africa, when they would attend cricket matches and other sporting events. Although Stuart loved watching sport, he was not a participant. In fact, he was known to say, "When the urge to take some exercise comes to mind, I sit quietly in a chair until the urge subsides." Jane was a soulmate of a different kind. Being a medical doctor and a specialist in geriatric psychiatry, she kept a close watch on Stuart's health and well-being, and added a daughter's caring to their relationship. The isolation of the pandemic was a difficult time for Stuart, made easier by the constant daily communications with John and Jane, and by the care and companionship of Monica, who had helped care for Anita during her illness, and who continued to manage his home. Although the pandemic prevented John and Jane from travelling to South Africa during his final illness, their close daily contact was maintained with gratitude to the doctors and staff of the Christian Barnard Hospital, who were sensitive and helpful in keeping them in touch with him through facilitating WhatsApp communications. Essays in the single volume Under the Baobab, compiled to celebrate Stuart's 80th birthday, speak many volumes about him, as do the recent detailed online tributes on the UCT website and those tributes that you have heard tonight. He will be remembered with affection and respect as a loving husband, father, grandfather, and family member, a loyal friend, a distinguished physician, a devoted Vice-Chancellor who vigorously promoted higher education, academic freedom, and university autonomy, and as a courageously engaged citizen of his country. Thank you.
Thank you, Solly. Our three Vice-Chancellors of the last century were in so many respects so very different, yet each made critical contributions that the other two could not have done. And I think that history will judge that UCT had the right person for the job at the right time each time. Richard Late from 68 to 80, Stuart Saunders from 81 to 96, and Mampila Rampela from 96 to 2000. 4 measures mark Stuart as the right person for his time, and taken together mark him as a great Vice-Chancellor. His first commitment was to the academic project. Among other things, for this meant for him ensuring that he recruited very good people and in this he followed Beatty's example of personally chairing all professorial selection committees, finding the right candidate or leaving the post vacant, and then looking after the person appointed. He set UCT on the path to becoming a research-led university and an example for others to emulate. And he ensured that he had strong people in his leadership team who were expected to and would challenge him when needed. Secondly, he realized early on in his tenure that UCT would have failed were it not to enroll many more than the few black students who had been allowed to register under the permit system. And as most would have come to UCT from DET schools, having followed the DET curriculum and having written the DET senior certificate examination, they would not succeed without academic support, without adequate financial aid, and without on-campus housing. He set about addressing each of these. It is probably not generally known to students today that they have Stuart to thank for the idea of setting up what is now the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Third, his innate abhorrence of all forms of discrimination and his courage in dismantling it where he found it, in desegregating wards at Groote Hospital and Somerset, in opening residences despite the Group Areas Act, in exposing the quota bill for what it was, and in successfully challenging in the Supreme Court, as it then was, the Botha government's regulations that would have made receipt of subsidy conditional, and his courageous defence of students' rights to protest. Add to that, he was an indefatigable and successful fundraiser. His fundraising, remarkably, and probably uniquely, was not parochial, and as we've already heard, ensured that WITS and UCT got support in the difficult 1980s. And as the Mellon man on the ground, after his retirement, he ensured that any South African university with a project that met Mellon's criteria and his own scrutiny got funding. Those qualities are generally known and others have referred to them. I must add a personal tribute. I have known him for 51 years, since I arrived at UCT in 1970 and found him and his young family in Driekoppen, now Capano, where he was the warden. He has been a mentor, boss, colleague, and friend. I was privileged to work closely with him for 20 years, from the time he became a part-time deputy principal in 1977 until he retired from the vice-chancellorship in 1996. To be able to seek his counsel, to advise, and to say when I disagreed, to know that he always listened, and that he cared when it mattered. That extended to my wife Kate and our daughter Ruth. I will miss him very much, not only on long summer days watching cricket at Newlands, punctuated occasionally and usually by calls from John in Texas, complaining when an umpire got it wrong. My debt to him is immense. John and Jane have asked me to read this tribute to their father. Dear friends, thank you very much for gathering today to honour our dad's extraordinary life. Although we cannot be together in person, a virtual gathering allows this event to be inclusive, which Dad would have appreciated. We particularly wish to thank the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Vakeng, and the speakers who paid tribute to Dad tonight. Thank you to Kate Brown, Mildred Kerr, Monica Pike, and Dad's close friends who have been so supportive during this very challenging time. A special thanks to Professor Solly Benneter, who liaised with the medical team on our behalf. To Dr. Trevor Guntholst for his wonderful care during Dad's short illness, and to the staff of the Christian Barnard Memorial Hospital for all they did for him. Thank you to everyone for the emails, tributes, and messages from all over the world. He valued his friendships a great deal. Wonderful tributes have been paid to Stuart, the friend and colleague. As his children, we had the privilege of experiencing him through a personal lens. We were truly blessed to have him as our father and our children's grandfather. We are so fortunate to have experienced his love and to have been shaped by the example of his life. We grew up on UCT soil. We spent hot days running through the sprinklers on the sports fields and winter Sunday afternoons hunting for pine cones on the slopes of the mountain. Many happy, adventurous summers were spent with the de Blanche family at Asia-Fontaine. A small diabolical dinghy served as the primary stage for the great Saunders de Blanche crayfishing endeavour. This involved Dad rowing while John hauled the nets into the barely seaworthy boat. It was inevitably accompanied by vocal strategizing, cursing, and triumph or despair, depending on the catch, followed by the consumption of red wine. Growing up, we always had what we needed, but Mum and Dad ensured that we were keenly aware that our comfort was not the norm for most South Africans. They impressed on us how apartheid loomed in all its horror over people's lives. We were taught that advocating for social justice is a moral imperative. Dad abhorred racism and bigotry. Woven into long conversations at the dinner table and around the fire were his clear expectations. We should work hard, always giving our best, think of others before ourselves, act against inequity, and treat everyone with dignity and respect. We will always remember Dad's love of history, literature, and the arts. He was a keen sports fan, and many friends and family shared afternoons with him at the Newlands cricket and rugby grounds. A day at the cricket followed a predictable format. A beer at 11:30, followed by a boerewors roll for lunch, and an ice cream or samosa at tea, depending on the weather. This was inevitably accompanied by an abundance of comments about local and world affairs, the state of play, and the quality of the umpires. Dad did not hold back, although he was loose with his interpretation of the rules. Education was very important to Dad and in our home. Dad always said that no matter what happened to us, no one could take away our education. From Latin declensions to mathematics, he did his best to keep us engaged. His encouragement and admonishments were usually accompanied by great storytelling and interspersed with humour. He would comment that we have both inherited his raucous laugh. He always said that we all laugh like donkeys. Much to his delight, Dad went from having no grandchildren to having 5 over the course of 21 months. He was very proud and a loving grandfather. Every conversation with us started with an inquiry about each grandchild. He and Anita took all of us on a safari to celebrate his 80th birthday. We can still hear his laughter as the 5 grandchildren reacted to his teasing and his pleasure when they looked in awe at a pride of lions within a few meters of our group. His energy and engagement with life were remarkable. It was easy to forget that he was nearly 90. His sudden illness and subsequent death have been an enormous shock to us all. Woven into our deep sorrow is profound gratitude for his immeasurable gifts that we will always treasure. As Dad is within us, so he is within our children. His qualities of integrity, courage, excellence, humour, and love are examples for all of us to follow. We will do our best to do that. Thanks for all you gave us in your wonderful life, Dad. We love you and we miss you terribly. It is now my privilege to invite the Chair of Council to pay tribute and make concluding remarks. After she has spoken, we will hear Hendrik Hofmeier's Ode to the Elephant with words by Pablo Neruda, composed for Stuart's 80th birthday. The accompanying video honours Stuart as Vice-Chancellor and leader. The Chair of Council, Babalwa Ngonyama.
Thank you, Hugh. Wow, what a tribute. And thank you all for being present at this solemn yet momentous celebration and memorial of Dr. Stuart Saunders. I would like to acknowledge the family of Dr. Saunders, friends, colleagues, and all those who have been touched by the reach of his heart. To live a life is an easy feat. However, to live a life of meaning and impact is the greatest feat of all. We have had an honor to hear from Professor Pakeng, Professor Ndusi, Advocate Kronya, Mr. Kanyele, Archbishop Makhoba, Ms. Burton, Professor Benetta, and Mr. Amo, who have shared their experiences and memories of Dr. Saunders and provided testimony to the life that he lived. I would like to thank them for enlarging our view of Dr. Saunders. They have given us insight into his heart, as well as his actions, which are worthy of emulation by current and future generations. Dr. Saunders had many talents, including the ability to work closely and in harmony with a wide circle of very diverse personalities and key stakeholders with sometimes competing and conflicting interests. He was an outstanding and remarkable man. He was a leader, and his readiness to serve with an open heart was a quality that was bestowed on him. To Dr. Saunders' family, we hold you in healing as you grieve and celebrate the remarkable life of your loved one. We thank you for making it possible for him to give his precious time and resources to UCT and to the South Africa over so many decades. He will remain close to the heart of the university and those who have had the pleasure of experiencing him during his time. His legacy shall endure and continue to inspire many for years and decades to come. I wish to thank and recognize those who played a part in organizing this memorial service. Our former registrar, Mr. Hugh Armour, and the team that he worked with. Our development and alumni department, as well as our communication and marketing department. Thanks to the South African College of Music and Cape Town Youth Choir for the musical tributes. Thank you for your dedication and your servitude. I would also like to thank each of you who has joined us today for this special memorial to honor a father, a husband, a friend, a fighter, a healer, and a peacemaker. Dr. Saunders has left a meaningful footprint on this world. He was purposeful and relentless in the pursuit of his dreams, as well as his selfless contribution to the university and to the lives of many students. I have been moved by his life, and he continues to be a beacon of inspiration for others to pursue their path with vigor and dedication. It is a mark of Dr. Saunders' impact and influence that we are sharing this moment with so many people from around the world. UCT is fortunate for having had him as one of us. His contribution will be forever embedded in the foundation of this university. I wish to extend my warm wishes to the family of Dr. Saunders again, as they continue to remember him. I thank you all for being a part of this ceremony to honor the outstanding life of an outstanding man. Thank you very much for making time. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Observe without being